The courtroom was tense. The heavy oak doors creaked open, letting in the unmistakable chill of winter air. All eyes turned to the teenager sitting quietly at the defense table. Her braided hair, frayed hoodie, and scuffed sneakers screamed out of place among the sea of polished suits and leather briefcases. Judge Clarence Daniels, a towering figure of authority with decades on the bench, adjusted his glasses and looked down at her with a mixture of disdain and disbelief. "Young lady," he boomed, his voice echoing through the chamber, "what are you doing in my courtroom pretending to be a lawyer? Is this some sort of prank? Who allowed this circus act?" The courtroom murmured as the girl stood. Her brown skin glowed under the fluorescent lights, her presence oddly commanding despite her small frame. She straightened her hoodie, cleared her throat, and locked eyes with the judge. "Your Honor," she began calmly, "I'm here as defense counsel for my client." The room erupted in laughter, the judge included. He shook his head, his gavel thundering against the wooden desk. "Enough of this nonsense. Security, remove her and find the real attorney for this case. I will not have my courtroom turned into a daycare." But she didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled a crisp document from her folder and approached the bench. "Your Honor, if you take a moment to review the affidavit, you'll see that I've been appointed by the defendant. Everything is legal and in order." The judge's smirk faded. His hands trembled slightly as he read the document, his complexion paling with every word. A silence so thick it felt suffocating settled over the room. He looked back at her, his voice suddenly uncertain. "Is this true?" Before she could answer, the double doors slammed open. A man in a navy suit strode in, his face flushed. "Your Honor, there's been a mistake." But it was too late. The teen had already placed her next piece of evidence on the table, and what it revealed would change everything. Judge Daniels froze as he stared at the document she presented next. His face shifted from confusion to horror, his voice shaking as he addressed her. How did you?" He stopped himself mid-sentence, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. The courtroom buzzed with whispered speculation as Judge Daniels slumped back in his chair, his face a mask of confusion. The document in his hand bore an official seal, the unmistakable mark of legal authenticity. He struggled to process what he was seeing, a legally binding appointment of the girl, no more than 16, as the defense attorney for the case before him. The crowd of attorneys, clerks, and onlookers leaned in, eager to see what would happen next. The teen, unfazed by the spectacle, spoke again, her voice steady. "Your Honor, I assure you, there's no mistake. My credentials have been verified by the Bar Association, and I am authorized to represent my client." The man who had burst into the courtroom moments earlier was now at the prosecution's table, clearly agitated. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. A minor can't possibly have the qualifications to stand as an attorney." The girl turned to face him, a slight smirk on her lips. "Irregular doesn't mean illegal," she shot back. "And I'd suggest you save your arguments for trial rather than trying to undermine me based on appearances." Her words stung. The prosecutor faltered for a moment, then quickly regained his composure. "Appearances? This isn't about how you look, young lady. This is about—" "Enough," Judge Daniels barked, silencing the room. His eyes narrowed as he studied her. "If what you're saying is true, prove it. Who are you? And how did you come to stand here today?" The girl took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping across the room. Every pair of eyes was locked on her, waiting for an explanation. Months earlier, in a small apartment on the outskirts of Atlanta, 15-year-old Maya Bradford sat at her kitchen table, buried in law books. The walls were decorated with faded family photos and school certificates, remnants of a happier time. Her mother, Vanessa, worked double shifts as a nurse to keep the lights on, while Maya spent every free moment immersed in legal texts. Her obsession with the law hadn't come from nowhere. 2 years prior, Maya's older brother, Jamal, had been arrested on charges of grand theft auto, a crime he swore he didn't commit. Despite their mother's best efforts, the public defender assigned to his case barely seemed to care. Evidence that could have exonerated Jamal was overlooked, witnesses went uncalled, and the trial ended with a guilty verdict. Jamal was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The injustice of it all consumed Maya. She had watched helplessly as her brother's life was torn apart by a system that seemed rigged against people like them, poor, black, and without connections. That helplessness morphed into determination. If no one else would fight for her family, she would. Maya began devouring everything she could about the law, starting with her brother's case files. She read through court transcripts, researched similar cases, and even emailed local attorneys with questions. Most ignored her, but a retired civil rights lawyer named Mr. Carter saw potential in her passion. He began mentoring her, guiding her through the intricacies of legal practice and helping her prepare for the GED exam, which she passed with flying colors at just 15. Through sheer grit and an unyielding belief in her abilities, Maya eventually managed to pass the LSAT, a feat that made headlines in local papers. By a legal loophole in Georgia's statutes, she was able to petition for early bar admission, citing her exceptional circumstances. Against all odds, she succeeded. Back in the courtroom, Maya stood tall, recounting her journey. Every word she spoke carried the weight of her struggle, her triumphs, and her unshakable resolve. The judge listened intently, his initial skepticism replaced by a grudging respect. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder as her story unfolded, disbelief giving way to astonishment. When she finished, Judge Daniels leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Miss Bradford," he said slowly, "your journey is remarkable. But none of this changes the fact that the stakes in this case are high. If you lose, your client faces 20 years in prison. Are you truly prepared for that kind of responsibility?" Maya's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I didn't come here to lose." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Judge Daniels raised his gavel but hesitated before striking it. His eyes narrowed, and he nodded. "Very well. But be warned, this courtroom is no place for theatrics. If you're here to play lawyer, you'll be held to the same standard as any seasoned professional." Maya met his gaze, unflinching. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As the judge prepared to move forward with the trial, a voice from the back of the courtroom rang out. "Your Honor, I have evidence that could change everything." The crowd turned to see a man holding a thick envelope, his face pale with urgency. Maya's stomach churned. This was a twist she hadn't anticipated. The man clutching the envelope strode down the aisle, his footsteps echoing through the stunned silence. All eyes followed him, curiosity mingling with tension. Maya's confidence wavered for the first time as she tried to decipher his intentions. Who was he, and why did he seem so desperate? Judge Daniels frowned, tapping his gavel lightly. "State your name and your purpose for interrupting my courtroom." The man reached the front and adjusted his tie nervously. "Your Honor, my name is Robert Steele. I'm a private investigator hired by the prosecution to review key aspects of this case." Maya's heart sank. She had anticipated challenges, but an unexpected injection of new evidence threatened to upend everything. She clenched her fists under the table, refusing to let her apprehension show. "And what is this evidence you've brought?" the judge asked, motioning for the bailiff to retrieve the envelope. Steele hesitated. "It's sensitive, Your Honor. It pertains to the defendant's prior activities, and I believe it calls their credibility into serious question." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Maya stood abruptly. "Your Honor, I object. This is an ambush. Introducing new evidence without prior notice undermines my ability to provide an adequate defense." The judge held up a hand to silence her. "Miss Bradford, I'll determine whether this evidence is admissible. Let's see what we're dealing with first." Maya sank back into her seat, her mind racing. She glanced at her client, Deshawn, a 22-year-old mechanic with a clean record until now. He looked terrified, his hands trembling as he whispered, "What's happening, Maya? They're making it sound like I'm guilty of something I didn't do." She leaned closer, her voice low but firm. "Don't worry. I won't let them railroad you. Just trust me." 3 months earlier, Deshawn had been arrested on charges of armed robbery. According to the prosecution, he had held up a convenience store with 2 accomplices, stealing cash and injuring the clerk in the process. But Deshawn insisted he wasn't there. On the night in question, he'd been at home with his grandmother, repairing her television. Despite his alibi, the police focused on him, citing a witness who claimed to have seen someone matching his description fleeing the scene. Maya knew all too well how unreliable eyewitness accounts could be, especially when they relied on vague, racially biased descriptions like a tall black man with a hoodie. The case was riddled with inconsistencies. Surveillance footage from the store was grainy and inconclusive, and the DNA evidence found at the scene didn't match Deshawn. Yet, the prosecution had pressed forward, confident that a jury would convict him based on the witness testimony alone. For Maya, this case was personal. It wasn't just about proving Deshawn's innocence, it was about challenging a justice system that often treated black men as guilty until proven innocent. Back in the courtroom, Judge Daniels opened the envelope and examined its contents. His expression grew darker with each page he read. Finally, he looked up, his voice sharp. "Mr. Steele, this report alleges that the defendant has been involved in gang activity. Where did you obtain this information?" Steele cleared his throat. The details were compiled from social media posts, neighborhood reports, and anonymous tips. Maya shot to her feet again. "Your Honor, this so-called evidence is speculative at best. Social media posts and anonymous tips? That's not proof, it's hearsay." The judge seemed to consider her words, but Steele pressed on. "Your Honor, the prosecution believes this information provides context for the defendant's behavior. It's relevant to understanding his motivations." Maya stepped forward, her voice rising. "Relevant? You're trying to paint my client as a criminal based on stereotypes and flimsy accusations. This is a blatant attempt to prejudice the court." Judge Daniels looked between them, his face taut with deliberation. "I'll allow the evidence to be entered for review, but its admissibility will depend on further arguments. Miss Bradford, you'll have the opportunity to respond during the next session." Maya's chest tightened. The damage had already been done. The jury had heard enough to form a biased impression of Deshawn, even if the evidence was later thrown out. She needed to act fast to regain control. That evening, Maya pored over the report in her tiny office. Mr. Carter, her mentor, sat across from her, his graying hair slicked back and his reading glasses perched on his nose. He flipped through the pages, shaking his head. "This is dirty, even for them," he muttered. "But we can't let it rattle you. What's your strategy?" Maya leaned back, exhaustion etched on her face. "I need to discredit Steele and prove this evidence is irrelevant. If I can show that the prosecution is grasping at straws, I might be able to shift the jury's focus back to the facts." Carter nodded, his expression grim. "Good. But you'll need more than a solid argument. You'll need a surprise of your own." Maya thought for a moment, then grabbed her phone. "I might have just the thing. There's someone who can help me, but it's a long shot." The next morning, as Maya prepared to leave for court, she received a call. The voice on the other end was hesitant but firm. "I know who really committed that robbery," the caller said. "And I can prove it." Maya froze, the phone pressed tightly against her ear. Her heart pounded as the voice on the other end repeated, "I know who really committed that robbery. I can prove it." She quickly grabbed a notepad. "Who is this? What do you know, and why are you coming forward now?" The man hesitated before speaking again. "My name's Malcolm. I was there that night. I saw the whole thing go down, but I stayed quiet because I didn't want to get involved. I didn't know it would get this far." Maya gripped the pen, trying to keep her voice steady. "Why should I believe you, Malcolm? This could be a trap. I swear I'm telling the truth. I've got photos, messages, proof that Deshawn wasn't part of it. But I need protection before I show anything. The guys who did it, they're dangerous." Maya exhaled slowly, her mind racing. This could be the break she desperately needed, but it was a double-edged sword. If Malcolm was lying, introducing his claims could damage her case even further. On the other hand, if he was telling the truth, it could blow the prosecution's case wide open. "All right, Malcolm," she said finally. "Meet me at Carter's Coffee on 14th Street in an hour. Bring the proof." An hour later, Maya sat in the corner of the small coffee shop, her eyes darting to every person who walked through the door. Finally, a man in his late 20s entered, wearing a hoodie and a nervous expression. He scanned the room before spotting her and approached cautiously. "You Maya?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her. "That depends." "Are you Malcolm?" she countered. He nodded and pulled a manila envelope from his backpack. "Everything you need is in here. Photos of the real guys, text messages where they planned the robbery, even a recording of them bragging about it." Maya took the envelope but didn't open it right away. "Why now? Why risk coming forward after all this time?" Malcolm fidgeted with his hands. Because I can't sleep at night knowing an innocent guy is about to go down for something he didn't do. But I need your word, you won't use my name in court. If they find out I snitched, I'm as good as dead. Maya leaned forward, her expression serious. I'll do everything I can to protect you, but I need to verify this first. If you're lying, it won't just ruin the case, it could ruin Deshawn's life. Malcolm met her gaze, his voice firm. I'm not lying. That evening, Maya sat in her office with Mr. Carter, going through the contents of the envelope. The photos clearly showed 3 men standing outside the convenience store on the night of the robbery. One of them was holding a weapon. The text messages were equally damning, with timestamps that matched the timeline of the crime. But the real bombshell was the recording, a conversation between 2 of the men, casually laughing about how nobody would ever find out. This is a smoking gun, Carter said, his voice tinged with both excitement and caution. But you'll need to tread carefully. The prosecution's going to fight like hell to keep this out of evidence. Maya nodded. I know. But if we can get it admitted, it could completely destroy their case. The next morning, Maya walked into the courtroom with a renewed sense of purpose. She filed a motion to introduce the new evidence, but as expected, the prosecution immediately objected. Your Honor, the prosecutor argued, this evidence is unverified and comes from an anonymous source. It's highly unreliable. Maya stepped forward. Your Honor, the evidence is concrete and corroborates our claim that my client is innocent. The prosecution has spent weeks building a case on shaky, circumstantial evidence. Now that we have something definitive, they're suddenly concerned about credibility. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Miss Bradford, do you have any way of verifying the authenticity of this evidence? Maya took a deep breath. I can call a witness to the stand. Someone who was present during the robbery and can testify to its accuracy. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but Judge Daniels silenced them with a bang of his gavel. Very well. We'll hear from this witness. But be warned, Miss Bradford, if this evidence falls apart, it will reflect poorly on both you and your client. Maya nodded, her heart pounding. She knew the risk, but she also knew this was Deshawn's best chance at freedom. As Maya prepared to call Malcolm to the stand, she received a text message. I can't do it. They know I talked to you. If I show up, I'm dead. Maya's stomach dropped. She glanced at Deshawn, who was watching her with hope in his eyes. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she could deliver on her promise to save him. Maya stared at the message on her phone, her chest tightening with panic. Malcolm was backing out. The key witness, the one person who could verify the evidence, was too scared to testify. Without him, the photos, texts, and recordings would be dismissed as unsubstantiated. She glanced at Deshawn, who looked at her with quiet faith, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her. The judge's voice snapped her back to reality. Miss Bradford, is your witness ready to testify? Maya swallowed hard, stalling for time. Your Honor, I need a brief recess to confirm the availability of my witness. The prosecutor smirked. Your Honor, this is a waste of time. The defense has been relying on theatrics from the start. If they don't have a credible witness, this evidence should be struck from the record. Judge Daniels raised a brow at Maya. Miss Bradford, I'll allow a brief recess, but I expect you to have a clear answer when we return. Is that understood? Yes, Your Honor, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Outside the courtroom, Maya paced the hallway, gripping her phone like a lifeline. She dialed Malcolm's number, but it went straight to voicemail. She sent a flurry of texts, pleading with him to reconsider. If you don't testify, they'll convict an innocent man. Please, Malcolm, you're his only chance. Minutes felt like hours as she waited for a response. Finally, her phone buzzed. A message appeared. I'm sorry, Maya. I can't. Maya closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. If Malcolm wasn't going to testify, she had to come up with another plan, and fast. When the court reconvened, Maya stood tall, masking her unease. Your Honor, she began, unfortunately, my witness is unavailable at this time. However, the evidence I've submitted is strong enough to stand on its own merits. I urge the court to consider it in the interest of justice. The prosecutor pounced. Your Honor, this is absurd. The defense is asking the court to accept unverified evidence with no supporting testimony. It's a desperate attempt to distract from the facts. Judge Daniels sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Miss Bradford, without a witness to corroborate this evidence, I'm inclined to agree with the prosecution. Do you have anything else to present? Maya hesitated, her mind racing. Then, an idea struck her, risky, unconventional, but worth a shot. She stepped forward. Your Honor, I'd like to call a new witness to the stand, the lead investigator in this case, Detective Harris. The courtroom murmured in confusion. The prosecutor frowned. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense didn't disclose any intention to call Detective Harris. Judge Daniels raised a hand. Miss Bradford, explain yourself. Maya's voice was calm, but her words were sharp. Your Honor, the prosecution has built its case around Detective Harris's investigation. If anyone can verify or refute the validity of this evidence, it's him. The judge nodded reluctantly. Very well. Detective Harris, please take the stand. Detective Harris was a burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor. He adjusted his tie as he settled into the witness chair, his expression unreadable. Maya approached him, her tone polite but firm. Detective Harris, as the lead investigator, you reviewed all evidence in this case, correct? That's correct, he replied. Did you or your team come across any of the information I've just submitted? Photos, text messages, or recordings? Harris hesitated. No, we didn't. Maya leaned in slightly. Why not? Isn't it standard procedure to investigate all potential leads? The prosecutor objected. Your Honor, the defense is badgering the witness. Overruled, Judge Daniels said. Proceed, Miss Bradford. Harris shifted uncomfortably. We followed the leads we had at the time. The evidence we collected pointed to the defendant. Maya pressed on. Detective Harris, isn't it true that eyewitness accounts, especially vague descriptions, are notoriously unreliable? He hesitated. In some cases, yes. And yet, this entire case is built on a single eyewitness account describing a tall black man in a hoodie. Do you believe that description is enough to convict someone? The courtroom fell silent. Harris avoided her gaze. The description matched the defendant, he said finally. Maya seized the moment. But if you had seen these photos and messages during your investigation, would you have considered other suspects? Harris glanced at the photos displayed on the screen, his jaw tightening. Yes, we would have. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Maya stepped back, her heart pounding. She had managed to sow doubt without Malcolm's testimony, but she knew it wasn't enough to win the case. The prosecution would find a way to spin Harris's statements, and the jury might still side with them. As the judge called for the day's adjournment, Maya gathered her files, feeling the weight of the uphill battle ahead. Just as she prepared to leave, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video message from Malcolm. I recorded this in case I couldn't show up, he said, his face pale but determined. Play this in court. It'll prove everything. Maya's fingers trembled as she watched the video. It wasn't just Malcolm's testimony, it was a full confession from one of the real perpetrators, caught on camera. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. Could this be the final piece of the puzzle, or would the prosecution find a way to discredit it? The courtroom was electric with tension as Maya arrived the next morning, clutching the video Malcolm had sent her. She had stayed up all night analyzing every frame, ensuring there was no way the prosecution could dismiss it as fake. The clip was raw and shaky, but it contained everything she needed: the face of one of the real perpetrators, his voice clear as he bragged about how easily they'd pulled off the robbery, and how Deshawn had nothing to do with it. As court resumed, Judge Daniels called the session to order. Miss Bradford, are you ready to proceed? Maya stood, her expression resolute. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to introduce new evidence, a video that directly implicates other individuals in the crime and exonerates my client. The prosecutor immediately objected. Your Honor, the defense has already submitted questionable evidence without a credible witness. Now they're presenting a video from an anonymous source? This is highly suspect. Maya took a deep breath. Your Honor, this video was provided by a witness who feared for their safety. While they're unable to testify in person, the video itself speaks volumes. I believe the court has a responsibility to consider all relevant evidence, especially when it points to the real perpetrators. Judge Daniels leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Do you have any way of verifying the authenticity of this video? Maya nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The metadata confirms the date, time, and location of the recording, all of which align with the night of the robbery. Additionally, the individual in the video is clearly identifiable. The judge paused, considering her argument. Very well. Let's view the video. The courtroom lights dimmed as the bailiff set up the projector. Maya's heart raced as the footage played. The shaky video showed a dimly lit room where three men sat around a table, laughing and drinking. One of them, a tall man with a distinctive tattoo on his neck, spoke directly into the camera. "Man, that job was too easy," he said, his voice filled with smug satisfaction. "We walked in, grabbed the cash, and dipped. And now some fool is taking the fall for it. Cops ain't got a clue." The prosecutor's face paled as the man continued, detailing how they had planned the robbery and chosen the store because it had no working cameras. The video ended with him laughing, saying, "They'll never catch us." The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on Judge Daniels, who sat frozen in his chair, processing what he had just seen. Maya broke the silence. "Your Honor, the man in the video is clearly visible, and his statement directly exonerates my client. This isn't speculation, it's a confession." The prosecutor scrambled to recover. "Your Honor, this video may appear damning, but without the person who recorded it to testify, it's impossible to determine its context or credibility." Maya turned to the judge, her voice steady but impassioned. "Your Honor, the prosecution has built their case on circumstantial evidence and an unreliable eyewitness account. Now that we have concrete proof of my client's innocence, they're grasping at straws to discredit it. This video shows the truth. Deshawn is innocent." The judge raised a hand, silencing both sides. "I've heard enough. The court will take a brief recess while I review this evidence in detail." During the recess, Maya sat with Deshawn in the hallway. His hands shook as he turned to her. "Maya, do you think this will be enough?" "I can't go back to that cell." "I can't." Maya placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This video is powerful, but we still have to convince the judge and jury. No matter what happens, I'm not giving up on you." Deshawn nodded, but his eyes betrayed his fear. Maya understood. This wasn't just about the trial. It was about whether the system could ever truly see him as innocent. When court reconvened, Judge Daniels addressed the room, his expression grave. "After reviewing the video evidence, I've determined it is both admissible and relevant to this case. Furthermore, the content of the video raises serious doubts about the prosecution's narrative." The prosecutor stood, his frustration evident. "Your Honor, while the video may raise questions, it doesn't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant is innocent." Maya stepped forward. "Your Honor, the burden of proof lies with the prosecution, not the defense. This video directly implicates other individuals while providing no evidence against my client. If that's not reasonable doubt, I don't know what is." The judge nodded slowly. "Miss Bradford makes a compelling argument. I'll allow the jury to view this evidence and weigh its significance." As the judge dismissed the jury for deliberation, a uniformed officer entered the courtroom and whispered something to the prosecutor. His eyes widened, and he stood abruptly. "Your Honor, I've just been informed that one of the individuals in the video has been apprehended. He's willing to make a deal in exchange for a confession." The room erupted in chaos. Maya turned to Deshawn, her heart pounding. Could this be the final nail in the coffin for the prosecution's case, or was it another twist in the system's game? The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the news of the arrest spread like wildfire. Judge Daniels called for order, banging his gavel until the murmurs subsided. "Mr. Miller," the judge addressed the prosecutor, "are you saying that one of the individuals from the video is in custody and willing to confess?" The prosecutor adjusted his tie, his confidence visibly shaken. "Yes, Your Honor. I've just been informed that the individual, one Marcus Tate, was apprehended during a routine traffic stop. He's agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for leniency." Maya's heart raced. This was it, the break she needed. If Marcus confessed, it would obliterate the prosecution's case against Deshawn. But she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. Why had Marcus been so quick to cooperate? And what kind of deal was he striking? 30 minutes later, the court reconvened. Marcus Tate, a wiry man in his late 20s, was escorted into the courtroom in handcuffs. His tattooed neck matched the description of the man from the video perfectly. He glanced around the room, his eyes lingering on Maya and then Deshawn, before being seated at the witness stand. The prosecutor began his questioning. "Mr. Tate, you were recently apprehended in connection with a robbery at the convenience store on the night in question. Is that correct?" Marcus nodded, his voice low. "Yeah, that's right." "And were you, in fact, involved in the robbery?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded again. "Yeah, I was." The prosecutor glanced at the jury, letting the admission sink in before continuing. "Can you confirm whether the defendant, Deshawn Carter, was involved in the crime?" Marcus looked at Deshawn, his face unreadable. Then he shook his head. "No. He wasn't there. I don't even know him." The courtroom erupted. Maya exhaled in relief, but her instincts told her to remain cautious. Something about Marcus's demeanor felt rehearsed. Judge Daniels silenced the crowd with a bang of his gavel. "Mr. Tate, can you explain how the defendant's name came to be associated with this crime?" Marcus shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe someone needed a scapegoat. Cops didn't even look for us, they just went after him." Maya stood to cross-examine. "Mr. Tate, why are you coming forward now? Why not confess earlier?" Marcus shifted in his seat. "Didn't see the point. But now that I'm caught, might as well tell the truth." Maya stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "And what truth is that, Mr. Tate? That you orchestrated this robbery and let an innocent man take the fall?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." She pressed further. "Do you have any proof to corroborate your confession? Anything that ties you and your accomplices to the crime?" Marcus looked uncomfortable. "The video. And I guess there's some stuff at my place. Clothes, the weapon." Maya turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request that law enforcement secure and review the evidence at Mr. Tate's residence immediately." The judge nodded. "Agreed. Bailiff, ensure the necessary steps are taken." After Marcus was escorted out, the prosecution's case began to unravel. The jury had seen the video, heard the confession, and was now aware of the physical evidence tying Marcus to the crime. But Maya wasn't ready to celebrate yet. Something about the timing of Marcus's confession gnawed at her. That evening, as Maya reviewed her notes in her office, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Marcus is lying about something. Be careful." Her blood ran cold. She quickly called the number, but it went to voicemail. She sent a text back. "Who is this? What do you mean?" No response. The next day in court, the jury appeared visibly shaken as the evidence from Marcus's home was presented. A hoodie matching the description given by the witness, fingerprints on the weapon found at the scene, and cash marked from the robbery. The prosecution, desperate to salvage their case, tried to argue that Deshawn could have been an accomplice, but it was clear they were grasping at straws. Marcus's confession had effectively destroyed their narrative. As closing arguments began, Maya delivered a powerful speech, her voice unwavering. "This case is about more than just Deshawn Carter. It's about a system that's all too willing to convict young black men without proper evidence." The prosecution's case was built on assumptions and stereotypes, but today, we've seen the truth. Deshawn is innocent. It's time to give him his life back. As the jury deliberated, Maya received another text from the same unknown number. "You're not asking the right questions. Why did Marcus come forward? Who's protecting him?" Maya's heart sank. Was there another layer to this case she hadn't uncovered? And if so, was Deshawn still in danger even if the jury ruled in his favor? The jury returned after hours of deliberation. The courtroom was silent as everyone waited for the verdict. Maya sat next to Deshawn, her hands clenched tightly on the table. She glanced at him, offering a small, reassuring nod. He smiled weakly, his face pale from the stress of the ordeal. The foreperson stood, clearing her throat. "In the case of the state versus Deshawn Carter, we find the defendant not guilty." A collective gasp filled the courtroom, followed by a few scattered cheers. Deshawn's mother, seated in the gallery, burst into tears, clutching her chest as if a weight had been lifted. Maya exhaled deeply, finally allowing herself a small smile. Judge Daniels banged his gavel, calling for order. "Mr. Carter, you are free to go. This court apologizes for the hardship this case has caused you and your family." Deshawn turned to Maya, his eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you. Thank you for believing in me." Maya smiled, but her relief was short-lived. The texts from the anonymous source still haunted her. Something wasn't right. Later that evening, Maya returned to her office. She replayed the events of the case in her mind, piecing together the puzzle. Marcus's sudden confession had been too convenient, and the timing felt orchestrated. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail from the unknown number. The voice was distorted, but the message was clear. "You're good, but you missed the bigger picture." Marcus didn't come forward to clear Deshawn. He was protecting someone else, someone with the power to pull strings. Maya's stomach churned. She dialed the number, but as before, it went straight to voicemail. Whoever this was, they knew something she didn't. Determined to uncover the truth, Maya pulled Marcus's case file and began digging deeper. She discovered a pattern. Marcus had been arrested several times before, but always managed to evade serious prison time. Each time, a high-profile attorney had stepped in to broker deals behind the scenes. Her search led her to an influential businessman, Richard Hayes, who owned several properties in the area, including the one where the robbery suspects had reportedly planned the crime. Hayes had ties to local law enforcement and a history of using people like Marcus to do his dirty work. Maya's blood boiled. Marcus hadn't confessed out of guilt. He had been pressured to protect someone higher up the chain. Deshawn's freedom had been a side effect, not the goal. A week later, Deshawn and his family held a small celebration at their home. Maya attended, though her mind was elsewhere. Deshawn approached her, holding a plate of food. "You don't look like someone who just won a big case," he said, his tone light. Maya forced a smile. "I'm just glad you're free, Deshawn. That's what matters." Deshawn nodded. "I'll never forget what you did for me. You gave me my life back." Maya placed a hand on his shoulder. "You deserved it. But there's still work to be done. This system isn't fair, and there are people who profit from that." Deshawn tilted his head. "You're not done with this, are you?" She shook her head. "Not by a long shot." As the evening wound down, Maya sat in her car, staring at the city lights. She opened her laptop and began drafting a motion to request a deeper investigation into the events surrounding Marcus Tate's confession. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Powerful people like Richard Hayes didn't go down without a fight. But she wasn't afraid of hard battles. The justice system had tried to bury Deshawn, just as it had buried countless others. Maya was determined to unearth every secret, expose every lie, and make sure those who weaponized the system were held accountable. She glanced at her phone one last time. Another text from the anonymous number flashed on the screen. "Careful, Maya. You're in deeper than you think." Maya smirked. "Good," she muttered. "That's where I do my best work." What do you think about this story? Could you have predicted that there was more at play than just the case against Deshawn? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more tales like this one. See you in the next story.